Hi, I'm Dan Snow, and I'm here to do a deep dive on one of the most anticipated movies of the last few years. It is Gladiator II. The first movie, obviously an all-time classic. How would the sequel match up to its illustrious predecessor? Let's check it out. 16 years after the death of Marcus Aurelius, under the tyranny of the twin emperors Geta and Caracalla. Wait a minute, this is a lot of historical inaccuracy. Bang, right at the top of the film, we're going in hard. In fact, the first thing you see in this movie, 16, is incorrect. So when Marcus Aurelius died, Commodus ruled for just over a decade. They killed him. There was then a meltdown, a succession of emperors. One year they had 5 emperors in a year. But then this strong man emerges, Septimius Severus, a warrior. He rules over the empire. And he's got these 2 sons, Caracalla and Geta. They're not twins. Why make them twins? Anyway, they were Irish twins, to be fair. They were born within a year of each other, very close in age. When Caracalla and Geta are on the throne together, which is for less than a year, for reasons we might come to, that was 211. So that's around 30 years after Marcus Aurelius died. So we're messing with the timelines here. Okay, we got a fleet. We got a sea battle. Interesting, with the Roman standards flying. I like some of the detail in the uniforms. The uniforms some of them look pretty good. Using drums and horns and flags to communicate between the fleets, probably pretty accurate. Oh my goodness, it's an amphibious assault on a big walled city in North Africa. I don't know why you're rowing when you've got the wind behind you like that, but I'm a sailing geek anyway. Shackled slaves rowing galleys. It's pretty accurate, I guess. That's interesting. There's that structure on the bow on the front of that Roman ship, and actually that is rooted in history. So there was this thing called a corvus, named a crow, and you would drive it towards an enemy ship or even the walls of an enemy city on the shore, and it would allow your infantry, your troops, to climb up and over onto that enemy ship like a gangplank. There was a slightly different one, which was a scaling ladder, so a ladder could be deployed from the front of the ship up to the city walls. And then that little structure looks like a little castle at the stern of the Roman ship. You do see those in Roman mosaics and images. You do see a little sort of funny castle shape on the superstructure. So these have been taken from ancient sources, I think. First of all, what is going on here? They're attacking Numidia in what is now Algeria, so parts of northwest Africa. While the Romans fought several wars against Numidia, they fought a war in around 100 BC in which they captured the Numidian king Jugurtha. There wasn't a big amphibious assault battle like this. That was in fact, several endless military campaigns, big armies campaigning in the hinterland, inland, and in a guerrilla war. They captured Jugurtha, they took him back to Rome, and he starved to death in a Roman prison. Then they conquered Numidia around about 50 years after that, all of which is around 250 years before this film is allegedly set. So why are they invading a part of their own empire? They're invading a territory that has been part of the Roman Empire for 250 years.
Raise the tower!
Raise the tower!
That's nice. You see the Roman standard bearer, they're called signifiers, and they would have carried the Roman standard in battle. Now, I'm not convinced that would have been a flag. I think it would have been a series of discs mounted on a pole. So they did have little flags, but it's unclear whether they've had the name of the legion, or they probably would have had a symbol. So it's not horribly inaccurate. It's kind of interesting to see it realised on the big screen.
Pakistan!
Now, what Hollywood cannot resist is bringing fire and explosions into battle scenes. Just cannot resist it. And we see here these explosive shells. I guess they're urns or amphorae full of oil or whatever set on fire. I don't think we have any evidence for this used in sieges like this. We do know on Roman ships they would have had devices like giant crossbows. So slightly less dramatic and explosives than the big catapults you see here. These catapults would have been used on land. Some of them could have been mounted on ships, but they would put enormous pressure on the hulls of those ships.
Release!
Now, Jugurtha's capital, the capital of Numidia, was not on the coast, so I don't know what this place is supposed to be. There were some Roman attacks on cities right on the sea. The famous attempt to take Syracuse in Sicily, when Archimedes was part of the defending force, the phenomenal mathematician, scientist, and he invented all sorts of siege engines and weapons to try and break up the Roman ships as they approached the walls of Syracuse. We got a Syracuse-like assault on a city that doesn't seem to have existed and that wasn't attacked in this period. God bless it. I like that. You get a sense of that siege tower. I think that there would have been siege towers to assault the walls. Roman generals, I mean, depending on the general, but often they did lead from the front like that. This general's putting himself right in the middle of the action. Julius Caesar famously wore his red cape and would gallop into the thick of the fighting during his campaigns in Gaul. This general is going on a tear. Not bad. Go on, Pedro.
Archers! There! Kill her!
Oh, Dad!
Hi everyone, I know what you're thinking, that's not Dan Snow, and you're right, I'm Louise. But I'm here to tell you about today's sponsor of the video, Heroes of History. Heroes of History is a free-to-play mobile game that's available on all devices. Any devices you have, you can play this game. In the game, you get to travel back in time to build your own thriving cities. So you start off with simple Stone Age settlement, and then build your way up to create a mighty empire or civilization. And you do this through building, research, and combat with help from some of the greatest icons from history and mythology. So the History Hit team have hidden these characters away from me. I haven't seen them yet, and I'm really excited to have a look. Right, Marie Curie, interesting. I mean, she did sort of discover radioactivity, so she could be very good at research. Vincent van Gogh or Gough, sure. He could make things look nice. Okay, Leonidas, the 300 guy, definitely the one from the film. Sure, he could be there too. He could help us build some stuff. Now, the hero you pick is actually really important because your success in the game depends on choosing the right hero for the right task. And that's because every hero has a different class, color, ability, and roles in battle. For example, I love Ada Lovelace, but I might not be choosing her to go into battle with, but who knows? Who knows what she's capable of? Whether you're playing solo or with friends, there are constant events, additions, and updates, so you'll never get bored. So if you're ready to meet your historic heroes, download Heroes of History for free today using the link in the description or scan the QR code. Otherwise, back to you, Dan.
Okay, so our hero is on a ship. He's coming home to Rome. Ostia, the port of Rome. Well, Ostia was indeed the port of Rome. Being a bit geeky, I think it's Portus, so they made a big artificial harbour outside Ostia just to increase the capacity of the port, and that was built under Emperor Trajan about 100 years before this. So Portus, where they're probably coming to Portus, but they're going to head up the Tiber River to Rome. And Ostia and Portus would have been thriving places. I mean, Rome's vast population was fed with supplies of grain coming from North Africa, particularly from Egypt. So huge amounts of ships coming up from the Nile, bringing all that delicious produce up into Portus, into Ostia, and then the short journey to Rome to keep the massive city of Rome fed. Because if those Romans got hungry, it would be trouble for the emperor. That is actually a really interesting depiction of Rome. I like the fact you can see the aqueduct there stretching across the Forum. I think that's pretty accurate given its relationship with the Colosseum. The Colosseum, you can see, look at that huge amphitheatre, that huge stadium, many stories high, really dominating the city. And then, oh, now we're down and we got a good clear view of the Colosseum there. There would have been statues and all these little niches along the wall. It was an astonishing building. There we go, look at that. They're not coming in the entrance closest to Ostia, they're coming in from the Colosseum side, but that's all good. Do you know what? I don't think that's a bad representation of Rome. I mean, they've squidged it all together. I think that's a shot from the Capitoline Hill down along this special sort of sacred way through the Forum, and you get the Colosseum, which is on the other side of the Forum from the Capitoline Hill. The Capitoline Hill is the sort of beating heart of the Roman political state. You'd have had the Senate House on one side, you'd had the archives there somewhere, I'm not sure they've been included, but I mean, I don't think that's too bad. So this really does depict the route a triumph would have taken. A triumph was a celebration, a parade given to a victorious general and his troops who were coming back from campaign. Perhaps they'd have prisoners in tow, perhaps they'd have booty with them. It was a chance for Roman citizens to see and enjoy, take part in the greatness of Rome and its conquests.
Emperor Geta. Emperor Caracalla.
General Acacius.
I have taken Numidia in your names.
What's curious is to know whether in this period this general would have been allowed a triumph. This general, who did not exist, by the way, has no basis in fact. He's shown having this triumphal procession through Rome. Now that would have been common in the Republican era, so the era before the emperors. When the Senate would allow a successful general triumph, there had to be someone whispering in his ear that, don't forget, you're still human, don't get too big for your boots. But in the imperial era, where you have an emperor, you see a lot fewer triumphs, because they didn't want any of these generals to get too big for their boots and start marching through Rome and get ideas above their station. And so that the more jealous and insecure an emperor is, I think the less likely they would have been to award a triumph. So I'm not convinced there would have been a triumph in this period, but it's a nice depiction of one for sure. Rome looks a bit different to the Rome of Gladiator. I think Rome looks a bit more realistic here. It's a bit more photoreal. In Gladiator, it was sort of whiter and starker, and it almost looked a bit more high-rise. I like the use of the ancient Egyptian obelisks you can see there. Those are great because the Romans did steal ancient Egyptian obelisks and erect them all over the city. That's good fun. This is fun. You see the general doing this as a sort of salute to his emperors. And there's a myth that the Roman salute was like the fascist salute, that was based on the fascists have took this idea of a Roman salute, the right arm in the air, straight up. But actually there's no evidence for that in ancient sources at all, so we don't really know how the Romans would have saluted each other.
In honor of your conquest, there will be games in the Colosseum.
I require no games in my honor. Serving the Senate and the people of Rome is honor enough for me.
Aha, and here we have the twin emperors. Well, where do we even start on these lads? So Caracalla and Geta were very close in age. Caracalla was older. They were actually very used to the battlefield. They'd served alongside their father, who was very warlike. He'd expended huge resources conquering Scotland, probably one of the biggest and bloodiest campaigns ever fought, even to this day, on the island of Britain. They're portrayed here as strangely white, and in fact their father, Septimius Severus, was from North Africa and their mum was Syrian. I don't think they'd have looked like this. And you see them here ruling together, and it is true that in 211, for some time that year, they were ruling alongside each other, but they were not friends. They sort of established almost different courts and rival camps. So the idea they're hanging out with each other like this, I think is not quite that realistic. The filmmakers here have decided to just make these two cartoonish evil. They look unhealthy, pasty, deranged. There's something very, very unsettling about them indeed.
There are victories yet still to come. Persia.
It is true that over Roman history there were many, many wars between Persia and Rome, and that front line was always moving. It was certainly very contested. Cities were destroyed, raids. It was just a terrible place to live, frankly. Many famous Roman generals attacked into Persia, into Parthia, and met their sticky ends. There was an occasion, Trajan, about 100 years before this, he actually succeeded very briefly in conquering Persia for about 2 years. And that's when the Roman Empire was at its full extent. The Roman Empire stretched all the way to the Persian Gulf. But the Persians rebelled. Trajan was forced to come up with a face-saving compromise and withdraw. And then Hadrian came in and made it clear that the Roman Empire would not try and reconquer Persia. But the Persians and the Romans, they would go at each other like punch-drunk boxers, neither side able to deliver the knockout blow for hundreds and hundreds of years. Until eventually, both sides got smoked by the Arabs. That's a different story.
India. Both must be conquered.
And he even mentions India there. Lots of Roman coins have been found in India. India was part of in a trading relationship with Rome. We think there were Roman merchants and travellers who would have gone that far. Alexander the Great had conquered as far as northern India. He even established cities, colonies in what is now Pakistan and northern India. So the Romans would have been it was part of the Roman world. And I can imagine that some of the more ambitious emperors would have harboured dreams of going even further than Alexander the Great, who they were all absolutely obsessed by. Okay, now we get some gladiators. Here we go. It's Gladiator II. We're back in the arena. Don't forget, the word arena comes from the Latin for sand, harina. So that was the sand that was on the floor of the arena that would have soaked up a lot of blood over the years. Oh my goodness! We get our prisoners of war being thrown into this arena, and that would have been typical. A lot of gladiators were prisoners of war. They knew how to fight. They were former soldiers, so they could entertain in the ring with their weapons. And I've visited lots of arenas like this throughout the empire. There were arenas like this in Britain.
Macrinus of Bistris, master of gladiators!
It's fascinating, they've now shown us Macrinus. That is, I assume, meant to be Marcus Aurelius Macrinus. He was North African as well. He'd risen to a position he was an official. Septimius Severus, the emperor, thought he'd done a good job, and he was raised to a middle-ranking Roman official. Macrinus thrives under the rule of Caracalla, and Caracalla will put him in charge of the Praetorian Guard, which is the elite imperial bodyguard. Soldiers dressed in purple, the only soldiers that are allowed to carry weapons inside the city of Rome. And Macrinus will end up commanding them. He will end up doing a bit more than that, but we'll come to that in a bit.
Stay close.
And we've got some seriously angry, are they baboons or, I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure who these guys are. Are they monkeys? They're monkeys with big old teeth that attack humans, which I'm not sure I know exactly what species of monkey that is. You know, if it's not historically accurate, why should it be biologically accurate as well? It is true that men fought with wild animals in the arena. Sometimes they were like these men here, put in there as victims to be torn apart by wild animals for entertainment. They were called bestiari, those men. Other times they were venatores, who were more trained huntsmen. They would fight, they would be given weapons, and they would fight animals in the arena.
Please, drink. Excuse me, Macrinus.
Okay, so we've got an opulent Roman party here. I'm sure there would have been many opulent Roman parties. In fact, we do hear in the sources that Caracalla and Geta were debauched. They loved partying, they loved drinking, and everything that goes with it. So I'm sure that's accurate. Oh, I love that. That's great. They're all doing a bit of rhino horn. A lot of cultures believe that rhino horn crushed up and inhaled or eaten would boost your libido. It was an aphrodisiac. So I think you get a sense of what this party's all about.
3 rounds, hand to hand. Swords! We want swords.
Fight to the death.
No quarter to be offered or given. Fight now.
Brother, let's not kill each other for their amusement.
I mean, I don't know if they'd have been allowed to smash up the furniture quite this much. And, you know, it is true that slaves, gladiators, they were there to entertain rich Romans. Well, you get a sense here looking at Caracalla and Geta. They've got pretty women hanging around them. There's a young man there who's obviously in a subservient position, and the Roman emperors, the Roman ruling elite, famously would use sex slaves. And interestingly, there's a suggestion of a same-sex relationship there, and for a Roman that wasn't a problem. If the senior Roman, the emperor or the elite Roman, was in a dominant position in that relationship, and if the slave or the young person was passive or recipient, then that was seen to be perfectly fine. That was seen to be masculine.
Senators.
My lady. My lady, I wish we were meeting in better times.
Better times will come.
And why are we here?
To take back the city and restore Rome to where she should be.
Here you get the scene that you have to have in all Roman movies. The senators have come together to plot. They've come together to take Rome back to a republic. They've come to get rid of an evil emperor. Anyway, they're going to plot because that's what's required in a Roman history movie.
When?
On the final day of the games, my army waits for my command at Ostia. 5,000 soldiers loyal to me will enter Rome and then the Colosseum, where they will arrest the emperors for their crimes against the Senate and their people.
I mean, this was a tumultuous period. There were plots all over the place. They plotted against Commodus and killed him. They plotted against his successor, Pertinax, and killed him. They plotted against his successor and killed him as well. But listen, basically every emperor in this period meets a violent end at the hands of plotters. There's more coming up.
Lucilla, you are the daughter of Marcus Aurelius. He had my loyalty. And so do you.
Senator Thrax.
Politics follows power, my lady. Take back what is rightfully yours, and the Senate will support you.
Thank you.
Now, Lucilla, the real Lucilla, the daughter of Marcus Aurelius, she actually died before her brother Commodus, so she should not be in this movie. But what is important is that it's true that members of the imperial family, women, would have been part of the politics, would have been part of the plotting and intrigue of the imperial court. So Caracalla and Geta's mother, she will go on to plot against the following emperor and help bring about his downfall. The idea of women, senators, senior soldiers, all plotting, it happened. Okay, the gateway to Rome. So this is strange. Rome was surrounded by suburbs. There wasn't really, in this period, the whole point about Rome is it was so powerful, so rich. There wasn't a kind of gateway walls around Rome in this period. Those would come later on, but for the moment it would have been sort of urban sprawl. There is the famous sculpture they noticed of the wolf and Romulus and Remus, the twins, and they were suckled by a she-wolf, and people did say that's why the Romans as a race were so violent, so wolf-like. Here they are arriving in central Rome, and it is true they were treated like celebrities. People wanted to get close to them. They wanted to know who they were. Even though they were slaves, they were some of the poorest and most powerless men in Roman society. They also had enormous influence. They were big celebrities. It's a very strange thing to be a Roman gladiator. I've been to Pompeii, and on the walls you can see where kids have etched in graffiti of their favourite gladiators fighting away. Here we go, this is it. This is the Colosseum now. Colosseum is the most astonishing arena in the Roman Empire. I like the fact you can see at the top there it's got sails, so these long wooden booms with sails to keep the sun and the rain off the crowds. They were operated by sailors from the fleet.
Line up! Line up!
Lowest down here you can see you've got the senators, And the imperial family have got the best view. They're right down at the bottom next to the arena. You can see the senators in their purple-lined togas. And then as you go up through the seats of the Colosseum, right at the top, you've got the poorest members of society. And women are allowed to sit just right at the top of the Colosseum as well. Although I would be quite happy to sit right at the top, because we have reports that people would go to the bathroom wherever they happen to be sitting. So you have sort of rivers of urine cascading down the flights of stairs. This is a great example of how the Colosseum be used by the imperial family. When it was built by Vespasian, the emperor, who wanted to restore Rome after a civil war, and his son Titus. Their intention was that the Roman people would see them, be seen in return. It would focus the affection and loyalty of the Roman people for their emperor. And the Colosseum had all sorts of spectacles there. There'd be music, there'd be wild beast hunts, condemned criminals would be executed, and then the highlight, later in the day, would be the gladiator fights.
Hold!
This is the bit that people have been talking about, and this bit is bonkers. You cannot domesticate a rhino. I've hung out with rhinos. They're very grumpy indeed. They do nothing that humans tell them. They try and attack their own keepers when they're feeding them. So you cannot break and ride a rhino. It didn't happen. It's not historically accurate. It's nonsense. They did have exotic animals like rhinos as part of the spectacle. So rhinos could be hunted, or rhinos would fight against other animals. But a rhino was never broken and ridden by a human. In the Colosseum, people talk about the number of men or women who died in the Colosseum. I mean, it's calculated that hundreds of thousands of animals died in the Colosseum. We think people in the arena would have, like gladiators, would have carried advertisements for local bakeries or businesses. And Ridley Scott wanted to add that into these movies. He certainly wanted to add to the first movie, but in the end he just didn't think it looked realistic enough. He couldn't have Maximus holding up a sign saying, yeah, buy my sausages. But as we know in life, if there's human activity, there's going to be advertising on it. More after this.
Get exclusive documentaries and ad-free podcasts with top historians. Watch on your smart TV or mobile device by downloading the History Hit app.
What's your name? I'm Ravi. I'm a doctor.
This is a great scene. It shows our gladiator here being treated by a doctor, and it is true. Gladiators got great medical care. Well, relative to the rest of the population, certainly relative to most slaves, they were very, very valuable commodities indeed. The owners did not want to lose their gladiator to an infection or disease. They wanted to get back in the ring, get back fighting, which is another reason why actually not all gladiators die violently in the ring. That is a bit of an urban myth. Gladiators are more like prize fighters. They're more like UFC fighters. They're very, very valuable indeed. Owners didn't really want them killed in the arena. There are occasions on which we hear about gladiators dying. There are occasions when specifically they said, let's fight with edged weapons today. But a lot of times we see a gladiator retiring with lots of wins, but a couple of draws and a couple of losses to his name as well. So every time a gladiator loses does not mean he's going to get killed.
More men die of infected wounds than there in the arena.
I like the way the doctor says here, more people die of infection than die out there. Historians think that is true, that the main cause of death actually would not be hacked to pieces in the amphitheatre. Plenty of other people did, like condemned criminals and people ripped apart by wild animals. But for gladiators, the valuable fighting men, their main cause of death was probably infection they got from wounds. And even if you're a soldier, even if you go on campaign, you're more likely to die of disease than you are at the hands of the enemy.
It is going to hurt. This is devil's breath and opium. As for the pain, you should breathe in.
We know that Romans had all sorts of herbal remedies that they would use. We know they used aloe to try and fight infection, heal wounds. They had opium from poppies to relieve pain. They would stitch up wounds. They would chop your arm or your leg off, and surgery very quick as well. So medicine was primitive, but there would have been physicians, there would have been doctors, and they would have tried to heal valuable clients, like rich people or gladiators.
Stay together and pull as one, yes? Yes! Yes! Yes!
Today, we relive the Battle of Salamis! The Trojans versus the Persians!
Uh-oh, there's water here. Oh, it's flooding. Okay, they're giving us a Naumachia, they're giving us a naval battle. Lots of people arguing about this. When the Colosseum was built, it did not have a basement area. So it's conceivable that that arena could have been flooded, but this is the dark secret about the Colosseum, is it's not that big. If you go there today, it's just not big enough to have ships like this rowing around fighting each other. So it could have been flooded and small ships could have fought, but it's more likely that Naumachia, fake naval battles, well, quite real naval battles, took place elsewhere in much bigger spaces. And this is what's mad about the Roman Empire. They did have full-scale reenactments of naval battles, often involving thousands of sailors and marines. Julius Caesar put one on, Augustus put one on, I think Tiberius put one on. They would dig out artificial reservoirs or lakes, they'd use the river to fill them, and then crowds would line the edge, and men would fight on ships to the death, prisoners of war and stuff like that. It is a mind-blowing idea. Now the Colosseum, the arena floor of the Colosseum is just much smaller than that. That sadly is not to scale. Now when you talk about the sharks, that's completely crazy. There was no way to capture sharks. The Romans talked about monsters of the deep. They didn't really identify sharks specifically. They just talked about monsters of the deep. There is no suggestion anywhere in Roman history they managed to capture one, transport it over land to Rome and stick it in a flooded arena. It just didn't happen, but looks cool. This is a big issue when you've got oar-powered vessels. We hear about this in ancient warfare. If you lose your oars, you're in big trouble. So you've got to ship your oars, you've got to bring them in and not allow an enemy just to sort of snap them all off like that, because then you're completely vulnerable. You can't move yourself around, you can't power yourself. So it is possible that when the Colosseum was built, they flooded it, would have had a small spectacle in that flooded arena. So Vespasian's second son, Domitian, he built this big underground area under the Colosseum. It's called a hypogeum, and that was gladiator cells. It was wild animal cells. There were lifts that came up and down, so you could sort of dramatically change the set in the Colosseum floor. You could introduce wild animals into a fight that was already going on. But to do that, obviously, you couldn't then flood the Colosseum because it would just all pour down into the hypogeum below. So if there was a naval battle in the Colosseum, it is possible in the first 10 years or so of its existence, but certainly not by 211, because the hypogeum was like an underground world beneath the Colosseum floor, beneath the arena floor. Yeah, it does make you think, if you're a prisoner of war that's been forced to fight in a huge naval battle on the River Tiber for the enjoyment of the Roman public, it does make you think, why didn't they just row to the edge and start shooting Roman citizens on the banks? Perhaps onlookers did get killed, either by accident or on purpose, I don't know. But it does look dangerous. This is an extreme sport, folks. Wait a minute. Is he reading a little newspaper, a little news sheet? Roma. I think there's a Roma on there. Hey, it's the Roman news. I love that. There were no newspapers in ancient Rome. Romans would communicate with each other on very thin bits of wood or on stone or clay tablets. There was some papyrus as well, so there were different methods, but big bits of folded paper are a later invention. There was a way of getting information about Rome, about the empire, and that was big carved stone or metal sort of plates were placed up on the walls of the forum so people could go and gather that information from an official source. But reading a newspaper in a coffee shop, that is very 18th century. You're well over 1,000 years out by that point. Right, we've got a big riot going on in Rome. This looks like a bad one, to be fair. It's right in the Forum. It's difficult to be certain, but Cambridge historians have worked out that they identified 150 separate episodes of riot in the Roman capital over the course of the empire. That's about one every 3.5 years that we know about. So, Rome used to riot. I think if there were interruptions of the food supply or your team lost in the chariot races, there could be a riot. They might be big, they might be small. This one looks pretty significant. Maybe even threatening the life of the emperors.
What else could I do? He and his bitch were plotting to kill us.
Okay, so one of them's got a pet monkey. Now we know that Caracalla in fact had a pet lion, but maybe that would have made him look too tough if they'd given him a pet little tiny monkey.
Don't you hear them? They're calling for our heads.
The Praetorians will put down this crowd like they have every other.
Who brought this on us?
58!
Geta and Caracalla are about to fall out. This makes sense because in reality this did in fact happen. They were always quite distant from each other. They had rival camps, almost rival regimes. So their closeness early in the movie I don't think is accurate. But two emperors, two's a crowd. Obviously you're not going to have two emperors for that long. Even beloved brothers.
Forgive my brother's outburst. The disease that infects his loins has spread to his brain. Every day gets worse.
Also, interestingly, he's described as a disease that's come from his loins and spreading into his brain. I think they're getting it syphilis there. Syphilis is a sexually transmitted disease that can lead to mental impairment. Now, if that's true, that's a bit tricky because syphilis doesn't really appear in Europe until the Renaissance, well over 1,000 years later.
What?
Sid, your brother means to blame you in front of the entire Senate.
But I did not do it.
For what's happening in the streets, the chaos.
He's lying.
No testimony can be more damning than one brother against another.
That's a lie. He always lies.
He can be very persuasive.
So, what will they do to me?
Oh, I don't dare imagine, but imagine this. What will they do to Dondas?
And so what eventually happens is that Caracalla, who in this movie is portrayed as the young, the weak, the kind of crazy and ill brother, he was the dominant brother, he was older, he was very warlike. And in the end, Caracalla has his brother Geta stabbed to death, killed. I think he's present at the time, and so is their mother. And Geta goes and hugs his mother's legs, begging his mother to help him as he's having blows rain down upon him. It's one of the most powerful, tragic moments in Roman history. And Caracalla stands there and maybe even takes part in his brother's murder.
Brother.
Put down the blade.
You lie.
Give it to me.
You always lie.
Give it. Look at me. Look at me. Look at me.
Lie.
Let me break this spell.
Lie.
Break this spell. Macrinus
was not part of that assassination. It was not part of that murder. So it's completely inaccurate. This shows Macrinus pulling all the strings, but I think it's pretty clear that Caracalla was able to pull his own strings at that point.
As Emperor, I have convened the Senate to appoint my first consul and bestow upon him the power to administer the military and civic functions of the empire.
So now we've got Caracalla. He's gone to the Senate House. He's the sole emperor. He's got rid of his brother.
I name Citizen Dondas! Hail Dondas! Hail Dondas!
Okay, he's made his little monkey a consul. I can see what they're doing here. This is based on the infamous story that Caligula, the third Roman emperor who sort of went crazy with power, he made his horse a consul. There's no evidence that Caracalla had a monkey, let alone made his monkey a consul. But you can see it's based on that. He's taking themes and myths and stories that we know from the Roman world and just squidging them into this period. Oh, look at this! We have a woman, or is it a woman standing here? Again, this is the movie makers feasting on other parts of Roman history. We hear that Nero, again, one of the emperors, one of the famous emperors who we all associate with kind of going crazy with power, he had a male slave. He castrated him and then made him dress up like his former wife. So it seems to me that we've met this young man before. He's now been dressed up as a woman. Could this be a nod to those stories about Nero? What you're getting here is the filmmaker going, Caracalla is every vice, the worst bit about every Roman emperor you've heard of. A repository for all the worst stories, all smashed into one man. He's mentally ill, he's drunk on power, he loves violence, he's ineffective, and he's putting animals in as consuls, and he's making male slaves, castrated or not, we don't know, dress up as his ex-wife. He's making a pretty obvious point here. Deranged emperors, bad. And this is an important point to which say we have so few sources for the lives of these emperors. We just can't be sure. A lot of times, historians, they might have been writing later, or even if they were writing quite near the time, they might have been big critics of the emperor. They're trying to destroy his reputation for posterity. So we don't know if these stories about Caligula and Nero are absolutely true. And it's funny because Caracalla has a terrible reputation as well. But that could be because Caracalla actually, he didn't really like Rome. He didn't really like the senatorial elite. He preferred the company of soldiers. He liked to be on campaign. He was rough. He was boorish. So it could be that the historians, who tend to be quite scholarly, quite elite, well, they don't really like men like Caracalla. And so they blacken their reputation as much as possible. The pen is mightier than the sword, folks.
The Queen will be granted a single gladiator to defend her against the Praetorian Guard. The champion, Hanno!
I don't think there's any notable women that are put to death in such a public way. The Romans were fundamentally misogynist. I don't think women played a big part in their thinking. They weren't worthy of being put on being sacrificed in such a public way. If you look at the Tarpeian Rock, which is this rock from which high-profile prisoners would be hurled, killed, if you go through the list of people thrown off there, it doesn't really include women. Some women, some members of, lots of women are executed, of course. There's plenty of violence against women, but it wouldn't have been quite as public and special as this. You can see the Praetorian Guard here. The Praetorian Guard are a big presence in both of these two movies, Gladiator I and Gladiator II. You can tell them because they're purple uniforms. The Praetorian Guard are a special bodyguard assembled by the emperors to protect themselves. It doesn't seem to have done much good because Roman emperors were always getting killed and assassinated, and usually by members of the Praetorian Guard. The emperors built up this force to protect them in Rome, and they ended up becoming almost as mighty as the emperor itself. They could be ungovernable. The emperor had to keep them cool with giving out lots of gifts to them, giving money and rewards to them. The Praetorian prefect, who's in charge of the Praetorian Guard, he could be the most powerful man in the empire, including the emperor himself. If the emperor was weak, the Praetorian prefect could be the power behind the throne. And often, that Praetorian prefect would take power for himself. In fact, Macrinus, here played by Denzel Washington, ends up becoming emperor after Caracalla. We know that Macrinus got Caracalla to make him Praetorian prefect, and then when Caracalla was mysteriously and unfortunately murdered by one of his own soldiers while he was going to the bathroom, Macrinus put himself on the throne of Rome. And Macrinus would not be emperor for long. In fact, he was the first Roman emperor never to visit Rome during his time as emperor, and he was plotted against and killed.
You look to me to speak.
Paul Mescal is playing the grandson of Marcus Aurelius, the son of Lucilla. Lucilla's son Lucius died, we think, young, so his character is entirely made up. This movie, this whole plot is fantasy, even more than the first Gladiator. It doesn't mean you shouldn't enjoy it, but we need to be aware that this is not history. Whew, so that's Gladiator 2, folks. It is a fantasy movie inspired by the Roman Empire. It's pretty crazy. I enjoyed it. The fight scenes are great. I love that sea battle in the Colosseum. None of that happened. Doesn't mean you shouldn't enjoy the movie. I loved it. I'd give it I'm afraid, a 2 out of 10 for historical accuracy, but you know what? That shouldn't stop us enjoying it. I liked it. It was an entertaining couple of hours. So I'll give it a 7 for overall rating. You see? I'm not a history geek, I can roll with the punches. If you want to see more movie deep dives, and if you want to see actual historical content about the Roman Empire and all sorts of other periods, ancient, medieval, modern, and others, then look no further than History Hit on YouTube. Make sure you like and subscribe.
Thanks again to Heroes of History for sponsoring this video. And remember, you can download the game for free using the link in the description below, and you can start building your civilizations today.